Hey everybody, what is good? Jacob back here with you for another edition of the Pickup Test and Electric String Player. And today we're going to be doing our long-awaited, highly anticipated tabletop review of the new Tone Dexter 2. We have an interview with James May about this unit and about the general principle of IRs up here that you can watch. Sorry, wrong hand, up here. And if you're not sure what the Tone Dexter is or what an impulse response is or how it works, that's a great place to get started before watching this video. But if you're still here, we're assuming that you know some of that basic information and you're here to hear some sounds, get some details about this unit. That's what this video is going to be all about. We're going to start with a quick walkthrough and first impressions. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the testing and how we did it. Then we'll give you a chance to hear how this unit sounds using different styles of pickups, different microphones, and all the usual goodies you'd expect from our testing. We'll talk about who the unit is for, its ease of use, our overall impressions, to help you decide if Tone Dexter is right for you. Whether you're looking for your first preamp DI, trying to upgrade your existing tone, or even a legacy Tone Dexter 1 user deciding if it makes sense to upgrade or not. And before we get started, as always, if you're new here, this review is completely uncensored, unsponsored. We were not given a Tone Dexter, and all the ideas you will hear are our own. With the first Tone Dexter, the value proposition was essentially a really high-quality preamp DI that gave you all the standard bells and whistles you'd expect from any of that type of unit, including your boost, a mute switch, a built-in tuner, which was very nice, the ability to break out your sound to an amp output so you can monitor yourself on stage while sending a DI to the house, etc., etc. But it had the killer application of allowing you to create your own impulse responses using whatever pickups and mics that you had. And that allowed you to get a vastly better sound in many cases than would have been available with just a standard equalizer that all of its competitors had. With Tone Dexter 2, James and his team at Audio Sprockets have essentially created a unit now with two killer applications that really make it stand out from its competition. It still allows you to make IRs, but in a vastly improved way, which we'll talk about a little later in this video, but has also added a huge assortment of routing options, essentially turning the unit into a powerful, programmable digital mixer. Compared to the first Tone Dexter, this opens up a ton of new possibilities and makes it a really practical choice for a lot more applications, from sophisticated blending rigs, singer-songwriters who want an all-in-one solution, sound explorers with giant spaceship-sized pedal boards, and a whole lot more. And considering the Tone Dexter's price point, even if you didn't use any of the IR functionality that's the core selling point of the box, Tone Dexter 2 is definitely the most flexible and versatile preamp DI ever made. And for those of you that don't want to watch the rest of this video, we'll just cut to the chase right here and say that this is one of the easiest broad spectrum, no-brainer recommendations we've made in a really long time, maybe since the DPA 4099 came out. And unless you have an incredibly specific niche situation, like you absolutely have to have battery power because you're busking outside, this unit will not let you down. And in most cases will probably help you simplify your life by reducing a lot of the pieces of gear that you're probably using right now. Doing these types of tests in a way that is actually useful and relevant for you, the listener, is an extremely daunting task. There's just so much variability in microphones, pickups, instruments, rooms, etc., etc. It's just hard to nail down the same level of consistency that we can do with our pickup testing, for example. So we've tried to leverage our years of personal experience using these units and also all the testing we've done previously to give you the best overall picture of what the Tone Dexter 2 can do and how it might perform with your rig and your instrument. First, we use two types of pickups for each test, one brighter and one considerably darker. And we also created IRs at different distances, so you could get an idea of how that would impact the overall sound. And because Tone Dexter allows you to use different microphones, we repeated that process using 3 different choices. The manual recommends small diaphragm condensers as getting the best results here. So we chose to start with the king of small diaphragms, the vaunted Neumann KM84, which has given us spectacular results with the Tone Dexter 1 in the past. Another small diaphragm condenser, this time a cheap Chinese knockoff of the Neumann, which might be a little closer to the mic some of you guys might be using. We also threw in one of the most easily available and commonly used large diaphragm condenser mics, the AKG C214. In the manual, James also mentioned that omni-capsule microphones could get better results more quickly. So we took him up on it and also got the omni-capsule for the Neumann, pretty fancy, as well as the cardioid capsule. So you'll be able to hear both of those on the same microphone. And finally, we took what we thought were our best results and shot out the exact same mic in the same position with Tone Dexter 2 against a Tone Dexter 1. The manual also says that the room you're training in has very little impact on the sound of the final impulse response, unless you're recording in, some bathroom or a crazy acoustic environment. So in order to put that to the test, we decided to do all of this training in my home studio, which has a little bit of treatment on the ceilings and a little bit of foam here and there, but is nothing like a really well-treated world-class studio, and is probably a lot closer to where you guys do your recording and practicing at home. And as always, we went right into my Audient Evo interface and into Logic with no other EQing processing of any kind, except for an occasional change in gain on the Audient interface to avoid distortion and peaking. Some of the IRs are just inevitably louder than others depending on the distance and how they were trained. Now let's do some listening, and just a reminder that we recorded all of these tests with the 100% wet IR signal, the microphone signal, and the dry pickup signal simultaneously. For those of you that are pickup test users, you can go onto the site and download all of these files, including some tests that we just didn't have time to put in this video, put them into your DAW, and compare them and shoot them out till your heart's content. Like the recordings you'll hear, we tried to be as consistent as possible during the training process, as we found that playing different types of material, in our experience, definitely can lead to a different quality of wave map. It was good to see James mentioning this and giving some solid recommendations in the manual, like bowing being more effective than plucked notes, and to try to make sure to sweep the range of the instrument, which we did. And we would also add to that that it often helps to train the Tone Dexter without too many overly ringing notes. So playing long sustained tones in C major, for example, on a cello, where you get a lot of sympathetic string vibration, can often cause the Tone Dexter to exaggerate certain frequencies that aren't particularly useful or musical with the training of an impulse response. And this is why, for full transparency, before you hear our final results, we wanted to record one of our training sessions so you could get an idea of how long it takes and what kind of stuff we were playing to train the unit. So here we are, guys, with the Neumann KM84 about 6 inches away, and let's do our training first. Here we go. It would probably take an hour to go through all the features in ToneDexter 2, and would be easier to just check out a manual or product description for that. But one thing that I really appreciated about this unit as a longtime user of the old ToneDexter is how James and his crew have really listened to their customers and improved every aspect of the old unit in ways large and small, while also adding some fantastic new features, particularly the routing I mentioned, which we'll get into a little bit later. The screen is now in color, but also allows for much easier navigation with rotary encoders instead of knobs. So now you can actually push buttons and see where you are and see what the unit is doing in a much more intuitive way. I love having meters. I love having EQ curves that you can see being moved and manipulated as if you were in a DAW or a really advanced effects processor. The training process is even easier and more intuitive now. You can create snapshots for much easier tweaking on the fly when you're at a gig. The tuner has been improved and converted to a strobe. They've added MIDI for those of you that are using more complicated switching rigs. But I want to highlight 3 things that made the biggest difference to me, again, as a power user, someone who's spent a lot of time with this unit and others like it. The first one is file management. With the old ToneDexter, you could just see the slot number on the screen and had to remember which IR it was, how you made it, etc., etc. File management was extremely difficult. With the new ToneDexter, we can finally name each preset with the mic that created it, which instrument it's for, which pickup it was made with, etc. This is incredibly important and something that gave units like the old LR Baggs voice print a big advantage, in my opinion, over the ToneDexter. Well, that advantage no longer exists. The ToneDexter is not only fully capable of allowing you to name the presets, which may seem like a small thing, but it's actually pretty big, but now it has a full-fledged web app, which allows you to store, swap presets, I should say, not swipe, swap them, and is easy to download, works flawlessly with the unit, and really gives you that flexibility, again, that you would expect with a flagship effects processor, right? They've also ditched the SD cards, thank you ToneDexter, and have added micro USB. I thought it was USB-C in my interview with James, but micro USB, which again, works great. You may need a dongle with a modern computer, but again, those things combined really make for a much better user interface, a much more seamless experience, a much more intuitive experience as a user. So bravo, James, for all of those improvements in the file management bucket. The next bucket is the training process, which has been vastly improved. When I first got the old ToneDexter, I had a lot of anxiety about if I was doing it right and wound up making a lot of wave maps just to make sure that things were leveled properly, that I was training it in the right way, and this really takes a lot of the guesswork out of the process. For new and legacy users, I think this is a huge improvement in the experience of creating your own IRs. Okay, now I want to talk about the biggest bucket, the one that I think matters the most, and that is what I set up at the beginning of this video, the new killer app for this unit, which is all of the added inputs and outputs and all of the routing options that that gives you. And that's the one that I think is really worth diving into because I think it's the one that's going to matter the most to you guys out there. And technically a mic input, but that was just for training, so it didn't really count, as well as the standard XLR out and amp out that you would find in any other of its competitors. The new ToneDexter has added a second stereo auxiliary input and a second stereo auxiliary output, as well as made the microphone input, which can have switchable phantom on or off, usable during performance. So you have a full-fledged microphone blender. You have separate EQ controls for each, including several modes that allow you to use things like crossover if you're using mostly the pickup for your bass response, and then maybe the microphone for your high end, as well as a bunch of different routing options that we'll talk about in a second. The auxiliary input is stereo, which means you can plug in your MP3 players or something that you might use for your busking, and also is compliant with tip ring sleeve type setups that run phantom power, a 12 volt, to blended systems like the Cello microphone and pickup system, for example. There's only one or two other preamp DI systems I know of that can handle that type of system, including the Felix and the Headway. Now the Tone Dexter 2 provides a whole new option for players who have a rig like that. One that's cheaper, smaller, digitally controlled in terms of snapshots and different settings you might want to program, and giving you a lot of other flexibility that I don't think even those other units can really match. The one caveat being that I would definitely place the Grace and maybe the Headway's preamp on a higher level when it comes to overall sonic quality, headroom, and signal-to-noise ratio. But I think these small differences only really show themselves in hypercritical situations. Like if you're using your preamp DI as your main studio preamp and recording a lot of solo cello stuff with the microphone, for example. And I've actually used the microphone preamp in the Grace in really critical studio situations, and it's been fantastic. I would be a little bit more hesitant to use the Tone Dexter for that purpose. So if that's something you're going to be doing consistently, maybe the Grace Felix might justify that much higher price point for you. The output and routing options on the Tone Dexter also provide a ton of incredibly practical and useful possibilities for every type of amplified string performance. If you do any type of playing with bands, you know that the sound man rarely understands how to dial in a stringed instrument. And we usually have trouble hearing ourselves in the monitor and really finding a tone that feels good to us. The new Tone Dexter's headphone output is also usable during live performance and routable a bunch of different ways. But to give you the most practical example, imagine running up on stage with a band at a bar and instantly being able to have your own headphone input so that you can always maybe keep one ear in and have enough of you on stage to feel comfortable intonating and doing what you need to do. You can imagine how this would be really helpful for people who are doing live looping and things like that as well. You can also route the stereo auxiliary out from the effects loop, which would have some really interesting possibilities for sound design and makes it much easier to implement this particular unit with other rigs or other pedals that you may be using. And there's even a really cool feature that we use to make this video where you can route just dry, unprocessed pickup and microphone from the auxiliary out while running your IR processed signal to the main output and the DI out. Now, why would that be cool? Well, imagine you're in a recording session or doing a live recording at a venue, but the IR that sounded great in that room was a little too wet and a little too processed to really work in the mix. Well, now you have all of your dry signals that you can send to the house and then mess with them later, maybe adding a more appropriate IR or processing them in a whole bunch of other ways. It's the kind of flexibility that guitarists talk about when they talk about reamping. That is, using a certain effect or a certain distortion sound or a certain whatever while performing in a studio, but then having the flexibility to go back afterwards, take that dry sound, and then reamp it. As you can hear during the demos, that switching between the dry sound, the microphone sound, and the process sound for comparison were all done in real time at the same time, sending them to different channels all through the Tone Dexter. I've had this unit for about 2 months now, and in live performance and in the studio, I'm just scratching the surface of all of the cool ways it can integrate with the multiple setups I use for different applications in the studio and on the stage. One of the most exciting new features of Tone Dexter that we talked with James about was the new spaciousness control. And what this essentially does is compress or expand an IR, making it longer and shorter without just kind of chopping it and changing the length. One of the most common mistakes we make when creating wave maps at home is in the headphones we'll tend to create one that is a little lush for a real acoustic environment where you have a room and sound coming out of a PA system bouncing off walls, etc. James did a really great job of explaining this in the manual, by the way. So what this shortening allows us to do is to take an IR that's a little lush and make it a little bit drier and more compact. And then conversely, when we go above 100%, which is just the IRs it was created, as we go up to, say, 200%, on the other end, we can take an IR that's a little bit dry and make it a little bit more lush and spacious. Let's have a listen to how this sounds. As you can tell from this interview, our impressions of Tone Dexter 2 are overwhelmingly positive. We didn't have a lot of issues with this unit, but of course nothing is perfect, and despite our enthusiasm, in the interest of fairness and objectivity, we did have a few small concerns that I think are worth noting. Firstly, if you're coming to the Tone Dexter 2 as your first preamp DI, or you've only used very, very simple ones in the past, there is definitely a little bit of a learning curve here. For legacy Tone Dexter users, I would say that learning curve is a lot smaller. You can definitely jump into the core features and everything is kind of in the same place. But I think it's also fair to say that that's difficult to avoid with any unit that has this many features. As I said, this goes far beyond any preamp DI on the market and really should be thought of more in line with something like a Helix or a Quad Cortex or something like that. And if you're used to using those types of units, the Tone Dexter is a complete walk in the park. It's nowhere near as complicated as using one of those flagship multi-effects units. The second tiny complaint involves the powering of the unit. Now, this unit, like the old Tone Dexter, does go from 9 volt all the way up to 15 volts, which makes it very flexible for pedal boards, which is good. And the adapter itself had different plugs for different countries you visit and voltages. That's awesome. That's really cool. But putting the Tone Dexter 2 into a pedal board is a little bit more difficult than Tone Dexter 1 because the total amount of amps is so much higher. A lot of that has to do with the new processor and, of course, running a color screen. This means that in a lot of cases you're going to have to combine the outputs of one of your power supplies to get the necessary amperage to run this unit. And if you have a modern power supply like the Chalk stuff, which I use and recommend, or maybe the Strymon or the new Voodoo Labs stuff, you should be in pretty good shape, and finding one of these connectors is not very hard to find, but it's just something to be aware of. Like I said previously, this is understandable and maybe inevitable with better processing, bigger color screen, and some of the things that we love about Tone Dexter. It just takes a lot more power to run. So as I said at the beginning of this video, for those of you that busk or where not having a battery is a deal breaker, this is maybe not the unit for you. Although there are some wonderful portable battery systems that are available today. Some of those lithium-ion packs are getting lighter and cheaper, and while it does add some extra expense, that could be an option for you if you still want to use this unit. My last complaint is about the switches. Now, like the previous Tone Dexter, the chassis is very, very sturdy. It's pretty similar overall. Nice metal everywhere, you know, feels substantial, feels well made, all of the things that you would want for something ready for the road. Now, the switches themselves are soft switches, which is cool. You know, there isn't a click, which makes its own noise. But in lieu of that, there's a really loud kind of bell-ringing type sound, which is pretty loud and annoying. Again, if you're on an acoustic stage, which I sometimes am, if you're blending with a microphone, which I do often, have a listen to this. I've got the unit down here. Check this out, guys. Why? I don't understand. at some point might try to mess with these switches or, do something about that. But I think that's a bit of a design flaw, again, for those of you who are going to be playing in quieter, more sensitive situations, just way louder and dingier than it needs to be. Thanks for checking out this review, and if you've come this far, you probably noticed that this quality of material isn't really available for string players anywhere else on the internet. So if you want to support our work and get some thank yous along the way, including all of the WAV files recorded from this session, come join the biggest and best community in the world for amplified string players at www.thepickuptest.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.